And of course, good morning, everyone. Getting ready for another edition of Community Conversation. This is our mental health segment, and we have our guest, Kenya Ward, LCSW, and we are just looking forward to the conversation. So stand by, everyone.
Founded and still sponsored by the Beloved Benedictine Sisters in Jonesboro, St. Bernard's has provided healthcare services for 122 years.
St. Bernard's Healthcare is a nonprofit organization.
All right, getting ready for our intro.
It's 9:02.
JLEK LP Jonesboro, the voice of Arkansas Minority Advocacy Council. It's now time for Community Conversations,
Okay,
a
all right.
program focusing on the people working
My
to
share
make
is
the
on.
Jonesboro community a better place, while offering viewpoints from all sides of the issues. The views expressed in this program are those of the participants.
So pull that mic closer to you.
KLEK 102.5 FM, the voice of Arkansas Minority Advocacy Council, or our underwriters or sponsors.
And also turn down the volume phone. KLK 102.5 FM. Good morning to you on your Wednesday. It's February 22nd, 2023. This is Community Conversations. Kevin Wonder is in the studio with you. And this is the fourth Wednesday of the month, so it is always one of my favorite segments, our mental health segment. And we have, as always, Miss Kenya Ward, LCSW, and she is going to give us another great topic. And we're actually going to learn a new term today. We're going to learn about executive dysfunction. So can you just pull that mic a little closer to you and tell us what executive dysfunction is?
All right, good morning, KLEK family. This morning we're going to talk about executive function and executive dysfunction. The word executive, it denotes managerial functions, managerial responsibilities. And so what we're talking about is the brain and the ability of the brain to carry out tasks and do them effectively and do them in a timely manner. So that's our working definition for executive function. Later, we're going to talk about executive dysfunction. That's a disorder that a lot of people do. Don't want to use the word suffer. Do deal with.
Afflicted with, maybe.
Are afflicted with on a daily basis.
Got you.
Makes life very interesting. So we're going to jump in and talk about the three components of executive function. So they are working memory, self-control, and cognitive flexibility. So I'll break all three of those down. So working memory is your ability to retain knowledge. It's your ability to take in information, remember the information, store the information, and then later use the information. And so retaining and retrieving is important with the working memory. So if you have a good working memory by that definition, then you have good executive function in that respect. Self-control has to do with discipline. And this is being mindful of your behavior, being mindful of your responses, being mindful of your place in a room, and how your behaviors and actions may affect another person. It's the ability to regulate your emotions in any given situation. And it's the ability to focus on tasks that are important and prioritize doing what's important first. Being able to delay gratification. Basically just being able to be in control of your mind and in control of your body and in control of your behavior.
And I have questions already, but I'm
Self-control.
going to wait till you get to executive
Go ahead.
dysfunction.
I don't
'cause-
want you to forget.
Okay, well, as I'm hearing you talk about this, it makes me wonder, so what happens when you don't have control, like when addiction comes into play, or when a person may develop a cognitive disorder such as dementia, because you talk about the ability to retain information. So what happens when a person can no longer retain the information, or if their thought process gets disrupted because of an addiction?
Well, so you spoke about addiction, which is a psychological dependence, and that's not quite the same thing. It does affect your executive function, but that's not something that is genetic or neurodivergent. Neurodivergent is when you're born with your brain just working differently than a neurotypical person's brain. Neurotypical means the way that you're born when you start meeting milestones, you meet your milestones at the same time someone would who is the same age as you. So that's a neurotypical person. A neurodivergent person has difficulty with the executive functioning, and it's something that you're born with. It's something that you're born with, or it could be a brain injury, or it could be something that happens later in the lifespan, like Alzheimer's. But addiction would not fall under that category. So,
Got you.
yeah. So, your question was, what do you do? We'll talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
Yeah, a little bit.
Well, that's why I said I didn't want to get too
Okay.
ahead of you, but it was already popping up in my mind.
Yeah, and that's a very good question. The third one is cognitive flexibility, and that's just the ability to, like I like to say, roll with the punches. So if you're going on about your day and something doesn't go as planned, then that means that if you have cognitive flexibility, you're able to switch, adapt, adjust as you need to according to the ebbs and flow of the day. So, and these are attributes of the neurotypical person. Again, the person who's born meeting milestones that someone their age would also be meeting. Does
Okay.
that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right. So, and I believe our next point on the list of talking points is, okay, we talked about the define. Let's get into the symptoms.
Okay. So if you, so I defined executive functioning. So that's what we consider normal, or the way that you behave with the neurotypical brain. With a neurodivergent brain, it's not a broken brain, it's just a different brain. You may see a neurotypical brain in someone who has ADHD or someone who is on the autism spectrum. And it's, again, your brain isn't broken, it's just that you think differently and you have to adapt and adjust to the world in a different way in order to function well.
And how does a person like that would normally adapt to processing things differently?
Okay. Well, the very first thing that is so important is self-awareness. Number one, knowing that your brain may be neurodivergent, and you don't even have to know that term, just to have an understanding that you may be thinking differently than your peers. You may be processing differently. You may be understanding information in a different way. What was the question again?
Basically, how would a person who is not typical, you said they process things differently. So what would be an example of a way in which they would process something differently?
Oh, that's a really good question. Okay, so remember last month we talked about motivation,
Yes.
and we talked about some ways that you can get started doing tasks that you don't feel motivated to do. With a neurodivergent person, you may say, well, all you have to do is get up and get started. But when your brain is neurodivergent, it feels that you are paralyzed and don't have the capacity to get up and get started. Because sometimes it's because of time blindness. You don't have a good concept of time. Sometimes it's because your area may not be organized. There's just sometimes it's because of the way you read or the way you can't do math. There's a lot of factors that play into not being able to complete tasks and not being able to finish well and not being able to even get started when you have tasks before you.
Okay. And get into the strategies.
Let's see. We're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves.
Okay, sorry.
So that's all right. So let me back up. Because I really,
Get me right. Get me right.
I
now.
need to unpack executive dysfunction just a little bit more. So you're going to struggle to organize materials, regulate your emotions. Sometimes your emotions are heightened. You may be a person where someone says, oh, your emotions are so intense, or why did you have such a strong reaction to that thing? And then sometimes it's hard to regulate and come back to center. And that's because your executive function piece of your brain is dysregulated. So it might look like misplacing things, being very unorganized, having very unorganized spaces where you live or where you work, because it's just the point of getting started. It feels like your physical body doesn't have the capacity to get started because the executive function part of your brain is dysfunctional. So, trouble completing multiple steps at a time. And that goes back to that working memory. You can't complete several steps or multiple steps at a time because you weren't able to retain, you weren't able to remember and recall what those steps were.
Okay.
So, it's a lot of procrastination and saying, I'll do it later. Later doesn't come, or you forget. Even important things you can forget because you're so easily distracted. It's like when the squirrel runs in the room, no matter what you're doing, you turn and you look at the squirrel because you're very easily distracted by anything that while you're working, trying to complete a task. If there's anything that's introduced into that environment, it's very easy to get off task and forget what you were doing or just go to another task. And that's another thing with the neurodivergent brain. A lot of times you'll start a task and then something gets your attention. For instance, you'll be folding clothes. Say you're in your laundry area or you're in your living room and you're folding clothes and you fold something, you only have one sock, you don't have the other. You get up, you go looking for the sock so you could put it with the other sock. And then while you're looking for the sock in the dryer, you find something that, I don't know, something fell on the floor, you pick it up, you need to go put it in its place. And so you look, 30 minutes later, you will look around and see that you've started 4 tasks and haven't completed any of them.
Okay, so getting into a professional such as yourself, how are these matters treated, like in therapy?
Okay, so one of the most common modalities that we use for executive dysfunction is CBT.
And define it for those who may not be aware.
Okay, CBT, the C stands for cognitive, B stands for behavior, and the T stands for therapy. And so we've had a whole segment probably about a year ago on CBT. And what it is cognitive is the way you think and the way you process. Behavior is what you do because of what you're thinking and what you're feeling. So it's think, feel, do. I think something, and because I think a way, I feel a way. Because I feel a way, I do something. And so CBT is one of the most effective ways that we can kind of tear down some of those barriers to completing tasks. Also, medication. So a lot of people who are neurodivergent or have executive dysfunction need stimulant medication to help them out a little bit. And so most times you have to have a diagnosis of ADHD to be prescribed a stimulant medication, but it helps you to focus on the right thing. Because when it comes to focusing, when you're having some executive dysfunction, sometimes you have great difficulty focusing. Now, that doesn't mean you can't focus at all. It just means sometimes you don't focus on the right thing. So sometimes, if you don't have the ability to prioritize and focus on doing things in order of importance, that means you may turn your focus and attention to something that's not very important or that won't render you very productive. So medication can help with that.
Okay. And this is definitely very helpful information. We're speaking with Kenya Wood, LCSW, for our mental health segment right here on KLK 102.5 FM. And I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier because I think it's important to highlight this point that you said it's not a broken brain, but just a brain that functions differently. So for someone out there who may be listening or watching, what would you say to them? Because, they may think that, there's something wrong with me, or people look at me funny or look at me different. So I kind of want to bring it back to that point.
Okay. Okay, so again, it goes back to first just being very honest with yourself, being very self aware that I may be processing, I may not be understanding as others do, I may process differently than others do, and coming to that conclusion. And then once you've discovered that there's something different, then, oh, let me go back to this.
Okay.
You often lose your train of thought when you have a neurodivergent brain. I forgot your question. I have a neurodivergent brain sometimes.
Me too.
Okay.
I
So
tell
go-
people I'm the ADHD poster child.
So I haven't been diagnosed with ADHD, but I lose my train of thought all the time. I have my notes here, but you asked me a question that's not on my notes, so I forgot it. That goes back to the working memory. You have to be able to retain several things at a time so that you can respond to the
For a
question
slick
that was
second, I
asked.
forgot the question, but it
So
just
the
came back to
question,
me.
you said, what would a person who is having this problem, they think their brain may be broken or they're different than others.
What would you
then
say
what'd
to
you say?
them?
About treatment?
Just in general, so that they don't feel discouraged or feel
Okay.
like there's something wrong with them.
Okay. All right. So I would be very encouraging to them to give them psychoeducation. Psychoeducation just means, well, first I would ask more questions and then give them psychoeducation about what's happening, what could be happening, what are some possibilities, and then encourage them to go to a mental health professional. They may need testing, further testing. I would say to them that their brain just works differently. It's nothing wrong with your brain. You're not sick. You're not ill. You don't. You can function normally in society just as anyone else can. You just have to learn how your brain works and then learn how to adapt and adjust your life to the way your brain works. And that's it. And also educating other people about how your brain works.
All right, so you've definitely given us a lot to digest today. Is there anything else on this topic or anything else that you wanted to say in our last couple of minutes?
Let's see. I want to say more about. I'm putting my glasses on. I want to say more about some things that we can do.
Okay, go ahead.
When we have this executive dysfunction. So again, most important thing is honesty about who you are, what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and what your struggles are. Once you're self-aware, you can always move forward. Okay, because they say half the battle is just accepting, what the issue is, and once you know, then you can move forward with some help and healing. So because executive dysfunction deals a lot with focus and concentration.
That's fine. That's just letting them we're in our last 2.5 minutes.
Okay, do I keep going? Okay, focus and concentration. So when you read, a lot of times when you have executive dysfunction, you read and you can't remember what you just read. You don't retain it or you don't comprehend it because you can't remember it. And so practice reading out loud, practice hearing your own voice when you read. Then your flow, it'll get a little bit better and a little bit smoother. Sometimes you may have to reread things. You have to give yourself time and allot the energy to be able to reread, slow down, and accept the fact that you may not comprehend or retain on the first time, after the second, after the third, when you've given yourself grace, when you've allowed yourself when you have the energy to read and reread, and you've given yourself a good amount of time to do that, then you can slow down and comprehend better and even possibly retain. Planning, sometimes you need to overplan, sometimes you need to give yourself, just say, if someone tells you this activity normally takes a person 30 minutes, give yourself 45, because it may take you more time to get started, more time to process, and then you may have to go back over your steps to make sure you did things thoroughly as you need to. Use timers. An accountability person is so important. Also, you can use something called a body double. A body double is someone who you have in your presence, whether that be digitally, whether that be in person, who can hold you accountable for the thing you're supposed to be doing. So say you need to start cleaning, but you feel paralyzed to get started. You feel like there's some block in your brain and you just cannot get up and get started. That accountability person in your presence just says, either they can help you complete the task or they can just simply be present. That person being present, it kind of gives you a boost, makes you more accountable to get up, get started, and to get finished.
All right, and we're gonna have to get ready to leave it there. We want to thank you so much for joining us today. This has been our mental health segment with Kenya Ward, LCSW on Community Conversations. This is KLK 102.5 FM. Of course, we got great gospel music all day long. Brother Carlos will be joining us at the top of the 11 o'clock hour. You guys have a great and blessed day. This is KLK 102.5 FM. All right, and we will stop the stream and stop the recording. Oh, you're fine.